We are finally ready to start talking about how to set up and access a database with our ASP.NET MVC applications. I wanted to start first by having us all download this this file that I have on Canvas under 430. It says code for HomeStore.txt. That's the one that has a lot of just code in there that you won't have to type out yourself. So if we just have that up, then whenever we have to put something in and it's too involved, you can just copy it and paste it. So go ahead and download that, and then download it and then save it somewhere, and then we'll open it up to here. So we'll have it available. Okay, so I have that over here, and you see in here there's just, it's for a lot of different sections that you have there that you'll be able to copy and paste. And I have it in there in the order that you'll need to use it. So if you just kind of follow along with this video, you'll be working your way down this text file. Okay, so what we're going to do is start by creating an application in Visual Studio. We're going to start from scratch, and we'll create it first. In this first video, we're going to create it so that we don't actually use a database yet, but that we use what's called a mock database, which is basically a fake database. So we'll have it all set up so the application we know is running. So we know that it's running, but the only thing left then would be to connect to a database. So then that'll be our next video. Will be once we have this all set up. Now, how do we swap out? How do we easily swap out the mock database for the real thing? Okay, so part one right now is just getting this set up. Now we're going to create an application that I'm going to call HomeStore application, and it basically it's going to display some products along with their categories. And that's what we're going to eventually have within our database. We're going to have a table with a bunch of products in it, and then each of those products is has a category, and so we'll also have a table also in our database called category, and that will be what will hold the different category names. So anyway, it's going to be very simple, just so that we can create something simple and then see how we can connect it to a database. So first of all, let's open up let's create a new project in Visual Studio 2002. So let's go ahead and do that. And we want the ASP.NET application. And I'm going to save it in the folder that I would like. And let's call it HomeStore. And we'll say create. We're going to start with empty, but we will use these, click on adding folders and core references for MVC. Let's uncheck the configure for HTTPS so that we don't have to worry about those messages about the certificate. And I guess we're ready to go on. So go ahead and say create. Okay, now the first thing that we're going to do, it looks like we do have an application here with controllers, folder, models, and views, so that's good. The first thing we want to do is to install some third-party software so that we can use it later. So first of all, let's go ahead and install Ninject. We already know how to use Ninject, so Tools, NuGet Package Manager, and then the middle one, Manage NuGet Packages for Solution. And click over here on Browse, and I'm going to type Ninject. I'll just do MVC too to help narrow it down. And we want Ninject MVC 5. remember this is the one, we're going to click on Home Store. Remember this is the one where we don't use that latest stable version. The reason why is if we use that, then we don't have that file set up for us called Ninject Web Common, and so then we have to actually create that file and put it in, whereas with that 321 and always before, they would with this install would automatically add that file into your project. So we want to use the 321 as we've seen before and install that. I have this little error window open. You won't probably see that. I just had this, I had undocked an output window, so it was showing up, taking up the whole screen. Okay, so that looks good. We can tell it's installed because it says uninstall over here. Now let's install something else. Let's install the entity framework. Now, I'm not sure. We've definitely talked a lot about the entity framework, but I don't think we've had to install it yet because we basically, when we used it before, we were using a code first application, and when we said we wanted to, when we told it, we set that template up so that we wanted not an empty project, but a full-fledged MVC application, then it would go ahead and it installed entity framework for us. So, but now we're doing this from scratch. We are going to need the entity framework, and so we need to install that. So I'm going to search for entity framework, find that one. Just says entity framework, and that we do want the latest stable on that, and say install. Okay, so that was installed. One more thing we want to install, and that is a library called Mock, M-O-Q. So what that is, you can read here, Mock is the most popular and friendly mocking framework for .NET. We're going to be using this so that we can create that mock database, that pretend or fake database. So we'll go ahead and highlight Mock and say install. And that should be good too. Okay, now let's go ahead. We are going to use dependency injection here. So let's set up Ninject right now. So we'll go to, we've done this, you don't have to put the Ninject dependency resolver inside the infrastructure folder, but we've been doing that, and so I'm just going to go ahead and keep consistent with what we've had. So I'm going to add a new folder under our project and call it infrastructure. And in there I'll add a class, and we'll call it Ninject dependency resolver. So this that we're doing here now is what you are familiar with now. So Ninject dependency resolver, and we see that it's empty here. And now is the time we can go to our text file, and this first set of text to copy over is what goes inside our Ninject dependency resolver class. So just go ahead and copy all of that, and then we'll get rid of all of this, and there that should be good. Right now it doesn't like this HomeStore.models. That's a using directive that's saying you're going to need to look for something in this models folder of the HomeStore application, but nothing in this here is actually anything. There's nothing in here that comes out of this home store model. So that's why it's just saying that. It says using directive is unnecessary. But we'll keep it in there because what we put in eventually down here under add bindings, we're going to need it for that. So don't worry about the fact that this is saying that it's a problem that will eventually resolve. Okay, so right now this add bindings, that's where we put that that one statement that matches up the interface with the implementation. But we're going to leave that blank right now because we're going to put some code in there to use a mock database, and so it's going to be a little different here. But eventually when we do connect to a real database, you'll see it goes right back to what you're used to, where you have that one statement that mentions the interface and then which implementation should be used for that. So that will eventually look familiar. So anyway, we'll leave that blank for now. The other thing we need to do though to set up this Ninject is to go to that Ninject Web Common folder. So remember, that's under the App Start folder. And here this is. And this is that down here, this is where we need to put a statement. So let's go back to Notepad, and underneath here, copy that, and we have that. So if you remember what's happening here, when the application starts, all of this code under App Start will be executed, and it sees this Ninject Web Common, and so all of this begins, and you see here's what happens on start, and then eventually, and we don't need to really get in and understand too much of what's going on, but eventually this register services method gets called, and then it says, okay, go here to find if there's an interface and the application's needing to know which implementation to use. This says where to go find it in this Ninject dependency resolver file. Okay, so then it would go in here, and then in the add bindings it would do that. We would have what we needed there. So right now we're going to leave that blank, but we have it pretty much set up for just later coming back and putting something in here. So code goes here to match up the interfaces with the implementations. Okay. Now we're going to add a couple of entities. We're talking about in this application we're going to have products and categories. So we need to add some model classes under the models folder. So right click the models folder and add a class. Let's add a class called product. And go back to your text file, and you see here how we should define this product. So I'm going to copy that and then get rid of this whole thing here and paste in place of that. Now what do we have? We have a product ID, a name, a brand, a description, an image path. Eventually we're going to put images in there, a price, and remember with C# for money values, currency values, we usually use decimal. Now we're going to have a category. What we're going to do though is do it right and not put just a category name in there, but we're going to have another entity called categories that will then, or category, and then that will hold the name of the category. So we're just going to have this foreign key here, category ID. That's going to be matching up to the category class that we'll create in just a minute. Hopefully this looks familiar. If you think back to code first, this is a navigational property. It's saying we're going to have along with all this information about a product, we're also going to include a property called category that has all of the information for the particular category that a product is under. So right now it doesn't like it because we haven't created a category class yet. So don't worry about that. We'll just leave it and that'll get fixed soon. Okay, let's go back to the models folder, right click, add another class, and we're going to call that category. And same thing, copy this code here. And what's in there is just a category ID. That would be the primary key. Then the category name, which is really what we need and want to have access to. And then here's another navigational property. It's going to be of type iCollection. It's going to be a collection of product objects, and that collection we will call products. That's what we'll call the collection. So the category then, each category will have not only a category ID and a category name, it will also have connected with it a collection of products that have that are under that category. Okay, so now I think we're ready to start talking about what a repository is. So I'm going to go to this PowerPoint slide. It's in your notes, and talk about what we're going to talk about a repository and the repository pattern. So remember, it's a big deal for ASP.NET MVC applications to use dependency injection, right? We want to have a degree of separation between our components, and we want to be able to easily swap things out. So what we want to do eventually is we need in our application some way of getting the product entities from a database, right? So that's going to involve, okay, what's that going to involve? I need to know where's the database and what's the code to get that and so on. Well, some of that's going to be done for us, but for now though, we're not going to worry about too much about that. So what we're going to do is we're going to, let's go down to the third paragraph here. We're not going to worry about how to connect to the database at this point. But what we're going to do is we're going to create an interface that basically has two properties, a collection of product objects and a collection of category objects. So that's all the interface will know, will say. It says, I'm going to have a collection of product objects. I'm going to have a collection of category objects. And so what we're going to do though is use that interface as the kind of the abstract layer, and then later, we can go in and we're going to at first set it up so that this interface uses this mock database, and then we'll see how easily in the next video how easily it is to swap out the mock database with the real thing. Okay, so this middle paragraph, let me read this. We want to keep a degree of separation between the data model entities like products and categories. Keep a degree of separation between those, and then the storage and retrieval process that we go through in getting those out of the database. Okay, so we want to keep a degree of separation between that, and what we do is we use this pattern called repository pattern. So this repository is going to be, we're going to have an abstract repository. We're going to have, again, like I said in that third paragraph, we're going to have an interface that has just a list of products and a list of categories, and that's all it's going to talk about, and we're not going to worry about where those products and categories come from at this point. So what we're going to do when we create this iProduct repository, we're going to, like I said, it's just going to be an interface where it has a collection of product objects and category objects. So this is the code that's going to be in there. I'm going to just go ahead. This is not some code I have there in the text file. So I thought we could just type that in ourselves. But we're going to do that now, and then we'll go on from there, and you'll follow along with me. But for now, that's what we want to do. But then later, what we're going to find is we're going to have a class that depends on this interface. Okay, and so again, that class, though, our application doesn't need to know. A class that depends on the iProduct repository interface can obtain product objects and category objects without needing to know anything about where they're coming from or how the implementation class will deliver them. And that's the essence of what we call the repository pattern. Let our application depend upon an abstract repository, then we'll set it up with Ninject so that Ninject knows about how to go and get that information from there, to get the information out of there. Okay, so now let's go on and go ahead and do that. I'm going to go back to the application, and I'm going to add a interface called iProduct repository. So we'll just put everything under models. In the past, we've put interfaces and implementations under models. Sometimes we have different folders, and we'll have a domain folder that has just our domain objects of category and product, and then we might have another folder of the interfaces and implementations. But for now, here, to make this simple, we're just going to put it all here together. So I'm going to right click under models and say add. Now we want to add an interface. So look here, if you don't see the interface here in this long list, you can say new item and choose interface, but I see interface right here. So I'm going to click on that, and I want to call it iProduct repository. Okay, iProduct repository. That's our interface for the repository. Now, remember, I've mentioned this before. Whenever we create an interface through Visual Studio like this, Visual Studio does not make this interface public. And it has to be public, or our application is not going to find it. So every time you add an interface, make sure you go in and add public in front of that interface. Okay, so now what are we going to do? We want inside this iProduct repository, there are going to be two properties. Okay, one property called products, that's a list of product objects. So we're going to call that, have it be of type IEnumerable product, and then we'll call it products, and then we'll have, here's where we would have get set like this. Now we don't always have to use both get and set, and so we might want to take out that set. In this application here, we're never going to be needing to set those from the application. So I'm going to take out the set part and just leave the get part, because that's really all we need here. Okay, so I'm going to copy that, copy it here, and then I'm going to have category, and it's going to be called categories. And remember, when you see that little dotted line, dotted little box, it's just wanting you to hit enter and go to the next line. If you don't do that, it'll eventually be fine about it. Okay, so now we have our abstract repository. We just have a list of products and a list of categories, and that's all our interface knows. Now though, here we're getting needing to set the implementation would be the next step. So I'm going to show you what we need to do into Ninject in order to say, for anywhere where we're using an iProduct repository, we need to tell Ninject to use this mock database, this pretend database. So I'm going to go into an inject dependency resolver, and right here's where this goes, right? So go back to the text, and we have this mock code here. So remember, it's this kernel.bind that usually says something like this, although this part here at the end is different. But we're just going to take all of this, and then I'll talk about what it does. We're going to take all of that and put it in here. Now, it doesn't like mock yet. And we can look up here and see, I bet there's a using statement that's missing. And sure enough, that we need a using statement using mock, M-O-Q. But we can do the show potential fixes, and it will help put it there for us there. So the actual library that we're using is MOQ, but here these this code here, when we create a mock object here, we use MOCK. So I'd say there's a lot to do with this mock library. You can do a lot of things, and I haven't used it very much at all. So it's a whole set of things that you could learn about mock, and maybe in your work you might actually already be familiar with this. So for now, don't worry too much. Basically, it's creating this object called mock, and then it's setting that object up where it's going to have this collection of products, and then we just put the products in there. Okay, the products are going to be put in there. Okay, now our product object has a lot more than just the name and the price. For now, I'm just going to keep it simple like that, so we don't have to worry about a bunch of stuff. But later, when we hook to the real database, we're going to have more in there besides just the name and the price of the products. Okay, so anyway, we set that up, and then when we do this bind, it's just a little different. After this, it's just to constant mock object. So this mock object is taking the place of the implementation. It's saying use this for the implementation. And what is this? Well, it's this object here that just got created. So it's just a little different here because we don't actually have the name of a class here. We're just referring to this code right above it here. Okay, but that's all we need to know in order to get this mock database set up. Now, why would we need a mock database? Because one reason is because maybe the people who are working on the database don't have the database ready yet, but we want to continue to work on our end and make sure our end is working fine. So what we can do is do this so that we have some mock data in there to play around with. But then what's great is once the database is good, all done, then we'll see in the next video how easy it is to swap it out from the mock data to the real data in the database. So maybe the database isn't ready yet, but another reason is maybe you don't want to worry about the database. Maybe it's not completely tested yet, and you're afraid that it's going to cause some problems within itself because it hasn't been tested yet or something like that. So again, you don't have to worry about whether that database is working right or anything. All you have to do is think, what's the bottom line? Here's what I want to get out of this database, so I'm going to pretend like I just went to the database and got it out. Okay. Now let's see, what else do we need to do? Now we're going to add a controller. Okay, so we need a controller here. We've got these objects, products, and we've got controllers. In the past, with Code First, we saw that we would have a controller for each entity. So like we had product controller and category controller. We can do that, but this application is just going to list the products, and that's basically it. So I thought I would just create one controller called catalog controller. So it's just going to handle both the products and the categories. So I'll choose an empty controller, and I want to call it catalog. I just wanted to call it something not product or category. So catalog controller. And it's very simple here. We're going to, though, have to put some extra stuff in here because we do want to use ninject, and we do want ninject to inject the data somehow, or a way to get the data. So we're going to need to do what we did before when we first started talking about dependency injection, and that is we need to create a constructor that takes an instance of this repository in as a parameter. Okay, so we're going to say public, and the name of the constructor is called catalog controller. Remember, we don't have, for a constructor, we don't have a return type, but it has to have the same name as the class. Okay, now what do we want it to be accepting? Well, it's going to be sending in, we want an inject to be sending in an instance of the repository. So I product repository. Now it doesn't find it yet. There's all kinds of things it doesn't like yet, so don't worry about that too much. What might we want to call this, the name of this? Let's call it repository, just to stay consistent. You can call it anything you want. Repository passed in. That's what we've kind of done with the name of our parameter there that's being passed into the constructor. We've called it that. So okay, so now when you look at the notes, you wouldn't know what's coming up here, so you would look at the notes and see what it is. But I'll just go ahead and tell you what's in the notes. And it says what we need to do here then is to, above here actually, have declare. Remember, that was another step to dependency injection. Declare your implementation up here, but in terms of the interface, iProduct repository. And we're going to call it repository. Okay, so we're going to declare it there, and then it gets something else gets passed in, and then our repository that we want to use here gets set to what just got passed in, which is the rep passed in. Now, why does it not like product repository? You can probably guess. iProduct repository is inside the models folder, and this class that we're working on right now is inside the controllers folder. So it doesn't recognize, doesn't find that. So we can say show potential fixes and say, yeah, we want to have a using directive saying that we want to look into the models folder of our application. Okay, so that took care of that. We have that in there, and so here we've got the declaration of our repository. Then ninject is going to pass in an instance of an implementation that implements the iProduct repository. Then we're going to set that equal to something called repository, and in just a minute you'll see how easy then it will be to work with, because the next thing we want to do here in the notes, you would see that we want to create an action method. Let's not call it index, let's call it list. And here's what we want to do. We're going to return, and we're going to eventually have to create a list view, right? Because if we don't say the name of the view here, it's going to go looking for, if we have this return view, it's going to be going to look for the list view, and we are going to create that eventually. But here's what we want to do. We want to pass that repository along repository here, pass that into our view, okay? So that our view can access that data. Now, one other thing though, the repository, if you remember, that's going to look kind of like the iProduct repository, but it's going to be more, it's going to have, there's going to be implementation there. But if we go back and look at iProduct repository, what is it? It's just a list of products and a list of categories. So if I want to return all of the products to a new view here, I'm going to mention the name of the repository, and then there's two properties, products and categories. So I'm just going to access, I just need to access that property called products. So repository would be an implementation of iProduct repository. iProduct repository has a property called products. Okay, so that's all I would have to do to pass in information about whatever this view is going to need. We just pass that in. And so this repository here is going to handle everything as far as where is the data, or how do we get the data, and where did it come from, and everything like that. We don't need to worry about it. We're just going to know we get it somewhere and it's going to be there for us to use. Okay, so we have that. Now let's go ahead and add a view that will match up with this list action method. So remember, put the cursor inside this list method, right click and say add view. We'll call it list. Now this view is going to get sent. What's it going to get sent? A bunch of products, right? So we don't want it empty without model. We want to say it's empty but with a model, right? For now, you can say, yeah, we're going to use the product entity there. So we're going to do this. We'll see that we have to make one little tweak here in just a minute, but we do know that we have a view that needs to be able to handle product objects. We can uncheck these here, but let's go ahead and use a layout page, but we won't create it ourselves. We'll let Visual Studio create it for us. Okay, so we have, it's called list, it's empty, we're using this model class called product, and we're saying yes, use a layout page, and then we'll say add. Okay, so here is what is in so far the view. Not much. Since we said we're using the product object, we have this model directive up here. Now there is one problem here, and this is the tweak I was talking about. We're not expecting one little product to be sent to this page, right? We're expecting a list of products because this is the method called list, and we're sending in that entire property called products that will be more than just one product. So instead of this right here, we're just going to come here. At least we've got that to kind of give us, you know, a reminder of where that product object is. And then in front, we're going to say IEnumerable. And then we'll put this thing in there. So we put the HomeStore.models.product inside this IEnumerable. So now we're saying this view is going to be bound to a whole list of product objects. Let's see, there's not much in here. Let's see what we might want to do. I don't really, the title there, remember the title's what's going to show up on the little tab on your browser. Let's just say we want it to say products. We don't really want this heading to say list here. So let's just get rid of that. Oh, I forgot, in the notes I had gone ahead and started talking about the layout. So we'll go back to the layout here after I get this list, this view done. So we'll go back and talk about the layout here in a second. But anyway, in list.cshtml, what do we want in there? Well, we want a list of all the products that just got sent to this view. So we're going to need a for each loop, right? So for each, and again, you know, we could think about what is it going to be. Well, it's going to be a product type. So we could say product. That's the type it's going to be. I'll go ahead. In my notes, I said var. Remember, you can always just have var in there. But if you know what type it is, and we know it's product, for each product P in model, now, why does it not like this? Well, here's where maybe it would be nice to call it var. The reason why it doesn't like this here is it doesn't have the using, there's not a using statement that says to take a look. Yeah, it needs to look inside the models folder in order to find out what this product object is. So we could put up here, do a using statement, but one advantage here to using var now is that we'll let the compiler decide eventually, and then we don't have to fool around with it. So that's probably why I already had it in my notes like that. Okay, let's put a div in here, and we'll end off the div there. Now let's put an H3 heading, which is just a heading that's a little bit bigger than normal. And remember, we're going to look at all of the different products in there, and each product is going to be called P for the as we're looping through. So we're going to say, but we have to use razor, so at P, then it knows to look at this P thing, and then P dot, what do we want? Let's just show the name. We know that our products had names, so we'll do that, and then let's do the price at P dot price. Now we could leave it at that, but I've gone ahead and done this, added this. I think we may have talked about this before, I'm not positive. But if we add this dot to string C, what this does, this is a C# thing, when it will change whatever the price is, which is a decimal number, remember, a decimal number that's not necessarily known to be a currency value, but it's going to change that decimal into a currency format. So the C stands for currency, and we could use a capital C or a little c. And then we could put, since this is the currency, what it's going to do is it's going to assume that we have 2 decimal places after the decimal, because usually with money it can go to the nearest penny, right? So that's the default. And so if we say C, what's going to happen is several things. One, a $sign is going to show up in front of the value, and then if we have something over $1,000 or more, we're going to have commas in the right spot, but then it's also then going to show the value to the penny. So that's what we want here. Now, if you were dealing with cars and you don't ever see a car that has like some price and 99 cents, right? Usually cars are full dollar figures. So if you don't want a currency value to show up and have the pennies showing up, all you need to do is here inside this, after the C, put a colon and then how many decimal places you want. So if I say 0 there, then that would show it to the nearest dollar and not show the pennies. Okay, so that's what we would do probably with cars, because we don't want all the cars to say $13,000 and .00, and no cents. We just want that .00 to be gone. So that's what we would do here. But for here, these are products, and they do have penny values, so we're going to leave it like that, and so the default then would be showing 2 decimal places past the decimal. Okay, so now let's go ahead and have a line break so that we can have a little bit of a division before the next product starts to show up. And for now, this is not going to be that great. We're not going to worry about it too much. Eventually, as we work through this here next week too, we'll make it look even better where we have an image there and make it look even better. Okay, so that's what we need to put into our view. Now let's go back to the layout. So we said to use a layout. Now, why does it not say use layout? Remember when we said we wanted to use a layout, usually we see something like this here where it says layout equals blah, blah, blah. So you might think, where is that? Well, what happened when we created this view and said we wanted to use a layout, it gave us a layout here under Views, Catalog, because that's the controller we're in. We have not under Catalog. Well, that's our list view, but under Shared, then we see our layout. So they created that layout for us, and we'll look in there, and it looks like what they've done is there's Bootstrap already there. It's going to actually look pretty good, but there'll be things we don't really need, like we can take out some things like this, my ASP.NET application and things like that if you want to. But anyway, that's created there for us, and it's kind of nice. We can just go in and change that. But the point I'm trying to make eventually now is that besides adding this layout for us, it created a view start file. And remember what the view start file is. That gets run at the very beginning when the whole entire application gets started up, and it here says use this layout. So since the view start says use that layout, then when we come to our list view here, it doesn't need to say anything about the layout because it already knows to use the layout, which layout to use. And remember, we've talked about, well, what if we would go ahead and specify a layout in here? We could, and if it's different, then that we would overwrite for this particular view. We'd overwrite the layout. We'd overwrite the code that says which layout to use, and we would use a different layout instead, right? So the view, whatever layout the view says to use, takes precedent. But if it doesn't mention any layout at all, you know that it's going to do what the view start file set it to be. Okay, so let's go to this layout, and we looked at it here a minute, and as I said, we can change some things. But what I would do right here is we see this action link here, and here's some things that look just really wrong here. As we were familiar with this from before, we know that's the name that's going to show up, in the top left-hand corner when we did code first. That's what this showed up, where it showed up. Let's go ahead and say Home Store Catalog. So that's what will show up instead. Now, hopefully this looks familiar to you. That index was the default action method that when we create a brand new project, that's what's being assumed to be the default action method, and home is assumed again when you first create a brand new project to be the default controller. We don't have a home controller, and we don't have an index method. We have a catalog controller, right? So I'm going to call this catalog, and if we leave off controller, then it'll see it as the thing called catalog controller. And here I'll put list instead of index. So what that does is it'll say Home Store Catalog at the very top left, and since this is a link, when the user clicks on it, it's going to go to the list method in the catalog controller. Okay, so we'll change that just to have that link work for us. And as I said, you can take some of this out or put other stuff in there. For now, we'll just leave it like that. Now, this, as we changed this, you might be thinking, oh, if when we create a brand new application, it's assuming that home is the default controller and index is the default method, we might think, well, maybe we need to alter the routes, the default route in route config. And we do. So let's look under, remember where our routes are held, under app start route config. Here's how it's set up, because that's how Visual Studio does it when we create a brand new application. This is not right? We don't want, if we do have a URL that's clicked on or that's typed in that doesn't have the name of a controller and doesn't have the name of a list, what do we want for our default? We want the controller to be the catalog controller, and we want the action method to be list. So we'll do that. So now that's ready and everything's should be good. So let's see, do we have everything set up? I think we do, because we have the routes are set up here. We have this catalog controller that is going to ask Ninject, where's my repository? Where do I go and get the data? And Ninject is going to tell us, let's go over here, it's going to say, well, anytime your application is talking about iProduct repository, just assume that this is the data there. So that's what gets passed in. Then this is the method that is run, where the view called list is going to be pulled up, but what gets passed into that view is this list of products. The list of products that is the property of repository. And remember, repository is what ended up being that thing that Ninject passed in. So basically, the repository that we had in the mock data, all of the products in that mock data are going to get sent along to the list view, and then the list view looks like this. And all it's going to do is list the name of the product and the price. So let's go ahead and run this. I'm going to highlight Catalog Controller and click Run. And here's what we have. Home Store Catalog, that will just, that's our home link, and that'll just go back to where we are right now anyway. Looking over here, just if you're curious, I just have this small, we don't have any other links in there, so there's nothing in there. But later we might put some links up in here. But sure enough, it went ahead and found the data that was our mock data and went ahead and listed it. We've got a ceiling fan, a hammer, and a box of nails. So this is a catalog from like what we might think of as a store like Home Depot or Lowe's or something like that. And so those are the products in there. So that's now what we have is we've set up an application that uses a mock database, and we're now ready to go on to create, in the next video, create an actual database and connect to that database, connect this application to that database, and then have the information from that database be shown instead of the mock data. So go on over and look at the second video to find out how that's done.